crawdads. It's just anything that's going to defecate in the water that is a vegetable based type of a eater that's going to supply food to your aquaponics system. And algae, you can actually feed your fish algae. There's certain types of algae you can actually grow in your aquaponics system to get in there. I haven't gotten that far, read that far, but I haven't created my own food source yet. We're working on that. We've got a building that we're trying to convert into a fishery and have a better one. I got a small worm farm right now, but we're going to create a bigger worm composter and see where that goes. But there's definitely alternative ways to feed your fish, and it's not a very costly way to do it. Worst case scenario, you kill a fish and chop it up and feed it to its buddies if you have to. But it's pretty reasonable to do, and people think, oh, you'll make so much money on selling tilapia and all that. Generally, the way the fish work in these systems is they pay for themselves. They pay their own rent, then you get to eat them. And that's the value of them. The value that you didn't have to buy fertilizer, you didn't have to buy soil, you didn't have to weed, you didn't have to, there's just on and on and on the reasons why. And you conserve water. These things use 1/10 of the water that a regular agriculture system uses for the same amount of food, if not more. Like a head of lettuce, they can turn a head of lettuce in about 30 to 35 days, and commercial setting is about 45. So, just a lot of different benefits with it that I can see. And what Chris was saying, the way of the future, people are busy now. People don't have time to go out and, last thing you want to do on your weekend is weed all weekend long. That's what I did last weekend, and I didn't like it. But I only have to do it so much now, because we got our garden under control, and we got an aquaponics system. So, say Chris and his wife, they're both busy doing things, but they want to have fresh lettuce. They have one of these IBC containers on their back patio during the summertime, and have fresh lettuce all summer long. Or say you're in there cooking with fresh herbs, and you have another one of these trays, and you have a tray of lettuce and a tray of herbs. And pretty easy maintenance. You can get the strips, do your test in like 30 seconds, and maybe once a week do an actual chemical test to make sure you're okay.
So you pretty much need a different system for each vegetable then?
No, you can grow like vegetables, like leafy vegetables, kale, lettuce. They can grow pretty much all in the same thing. Like tomatoes, cucumbers. I actually did really well at the cucumbers. They just took up the whole damn greenhouse. It was like they just took up everything. Was the only bad thing, but they did really well in the same system the lettuce was growing in. Tomatoes in the same system were pretty small, but when I separated them into their own system and made it more acidic, then they did well.
What about like squash?
Squash and
zucchini and all that?
Squash and zucchini have done pretty well in the floating system. We're real excited to try the gravel system. Matter of fact, we just put a couple in yesterday.
So you have the floating system, you have pots in there?
Little net pots.
And what's in the pot? Is it gravel?
We use, you can use gravel. We've used coconut fiber, which worked really, really well. It was just kind of expensive to get shipped in here. We used organic sponges, like planter sponges, and now we just use rock wool. I buy it by the case.
What is that, rock wool?
Rock wool, they're little planters, little jiffy cubes, and you can buy them just about anywhere. And that's the other thing, I was trying to think of like things that we can buy everywhere, not something that we have to ship in all the time, something that, heck, I'm out of this, but I can run down to Cardinal and grab them really quick, or I can run down to Plant Land and grab some cubes, or go to Western Building Center has a pretty good supply of that type of stuff, amazingly. And then, the other benefit that I completely missed about, the most important about gravel versus floaters, the floating beds. The floating beds, you have to have a separate propagation. You have to have somewhere else where you're propagating your seeds started before you put them in. The gravel, you can plant it right in the gravel, or plant it right in a cube and put it in the gravel, or if you got a chunk of moss, you can stick the chunk of moss in there and plant your seed right in that, and it'll grow. I've seen some people grow right in the gravel, just put their seeds in the gravel and let it take off. So I would think some of it would wash away. I haven't tried that yet, but there's quite a bit of information out there that supports it. There's guys that are taking a compost, like worm compost, and making trays of it, and they'll flood irrigate that and force that water through a filter so that they're not taking a ton of the compost with it. And they do that in a very small tray. So there's guys doing with gel, like a jelly, or running this water into it. So it's kind of like, what's your expertise? What do you think you can handle? What do you think you can do? And I mean, it just seems like every time I do more research, there's somebody doing something different. You know, one guy was trying to drill in sawdust and sand bed like this and flood it and then let it go all out. Why he was doing the sawdust, I don't know. There is different techniques for growing that way with sawdust and sand and hydroponic fertilizers, but so
Well,
that's
they
maybe
used to-
his angle, I don't know.
They used to do, you know, where you have a raised bed, you just put wood chips and sawdust and then just put chemicals in
Right, right.
instead of, you know, natural.
And yeah, that's what
water,
he's,
you know.
I think that's what he's trying, is that similar type of approach. And just let it bleed out really slow, and then he says that he's filtering the water. It takes a long time, but it filters back to his pond somehow, so. You know, it's just a very interesting way to do gardening that I think could be very easily become a future thing, especially that when I started looking at these IBC containers and everything, I was like, you know, I said it's so cool because you got a 250-gallon tank and you can keep adding these things. You can just, like, they're like blocks. You can just keep adding them. I've seen read a lot of information where people connect them together so that their fish can move between and they can close off fish, you know, separate them out, you know, for very cheap. I mean, there's also fellows that are, well, one gal in particular, I think it's Texas Aquaponics. She was in Kmart end of the season or Walmart or one of those places, and they had a bunch of kiddie pools for like nothing because like one corner got forklift damaged, one corner of them or something, but they were fine. They held water. That's her aquaponics system, you know, for $5 a tank or whatever. You know, just those little kiddie pools that everybody puts in their yard. So I mean, you can kind of whatever you dream of, you can have. My main aquaponic tank is an old fertilizer tank that was on the back of one of my work trucks. You know, it was a 350-gallon tank, and I just kept the lid off the top, and there was my fish tank. You know, so you can just about use anything that's plastic and not toxic. And that's the biggest thing when you're looking at things to use. Make sure, like a Tupperware or something like that, make sure that it's not going to be toxic. You know, if it's like in the number 5, number 6 plastic area, you probably want to stay away from it. Like those big, huge Rubbermaid tubs, those aren't the best for that type of thing. It makes you wonder if that's what a lot of our cattle drink out of too. So look for food grade barrels. Heck, at Murdoch's, I think they got barrels down there for $35 a piece, and you can cut them in half and make them into grow tables or grow tanks or fish tanks. So, you know, there's just an endless amount of stuff that's being thrown away every day that people can use for this. Or you can start from the expensive side of things, and you can buy tanks with glass sides so you can see your fish, and then you can buy, you know, pre-made trays that are all ready to go and everything, and you can either fill them with gravel or you can have media. There's what they call NFT, and I have never tried any of that. And basically that's like a big tray or like a rain gutter, and you're running the water through there at a fast rate, and it's kind of like a skim rate, and you put the plants in there, and you get basically these little caps that go on it. There's guys that are doing it with PVC fence post. I've seen those vinyl fences and everything. They'll take those and make them into grow chambers. So, you know, it's just whatever you have available and what kind of money you want to spend. You know, I guess I keep reiterating that. That's the biggest thing. My mistake was I was like, oh, it's a raft system, that's the best. Like I spent some money and a lot of time, like I said, and you know, when I got it all done and grew it for a year, I was like, gosh dang it, you know, I wish I would have done something a little simpler. You know, I'm lucky because I love doing this. This is, you know, someday I'd like this to be the way I make a living. But if I had to do it over again, if I was a beginner, I would start with a small gravel system for myself. And then if you love it, you want to move on, you don't have, and if you don't, you haven't wasted that much money. And it teaches you a lot, you know, so that if you want to expand and get into a bigger system, then, you know, you have the tools already to go that direction. And that's why anybody who's doing it, any of my friends that have talked about this, I always try to talk them into, you know, do something small, a gravel-based system, something where we don't have a bunch of filters and clarifiers and mineralization tanks and gasification tanks. And, I mean, it gets pretty confusing to where, okay, I can see where this would be applicable in a commercial situation, but for a little mom and pop thing, it doesn't make that much sense to me. You know, unless it's something that you're truly, you know, this is your hobby and you're gonna be out there enjoying it all the time, then heck yeah, then your benefits would probably be pretty rewarding.